Hey guys, how are you doing today? This is David Lucas back here again. Welcome back to my channel. And on today's review, I'm basically going to be doing a review that I did start earlier on. If you guys remember, it was a series of reviews that I started earlier on of the Spider-Man reviews. I did the very first Spider-Man, the very first Sam Raimi one, and I'm going to be doing reviewing of all the Spider-Man movies leading up to Spider-Man No Way Home because of No Way Home. Because of what the big rumor is of what everyone is speculating, that No Way Home is going to have all three Spider-Mans. And we already know from the trailer, after seeing the trailer, which I did my reaction to, you know that Alfred Molina and Norman Osborn is coming back. Doc Ock and Norman Osborn, Willem Dafoe's Norman Osborn is going to be coming back, and possibly Sandman 2 and Electro and Jamie Foxx's Electro. So I figured, why not? I never really done any reviews of the Spider-Man movies before, so let's do it. Before a couple months ago, if you guys remember, before October started, I did the very first Sam Raimi Spider-Man movie, and then during the Halloween, we did a whole specials of the Halloween reviews during October, which I love doing. I can't wait to do next year again. But now, before we start doing the reviews of the Christmas movies coming up in the coming months, with Christmas coming around, I really want to start getting down and cracking down on these Spider-Man movies, because Spider-Man No Way Home is literally coming in about a month from now. So we're on the home stretch. And in this review, what I'm going to be reviewing is, of course, Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 2. Yeah, Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 2 is actually a superhero movie that is kind of legendary with all superhero movie fans. You know, this movie is pretty much looked at as one of the greatest, if not one of the best superhero movies that ever been created. People love this movie. Everybody likes this movie. It's a big, big template for modern comic book movies nowadays. Well, I'm going to be the one to come out here and tell you guys that I actually disagree with this movie being one of the best comic book movies ever. Now, I know, I'm probably already getting a whole bunch of dislikes right now, and a whole bunch of hate coming at me right now. But before I say anything, yes, I do like this movie. I do enjoy this movie a lot. I think it is a good movie. It's a good comic book movie. I enjoy watching it, but I just never really thought, even from back then, even when I was younger, I never thought this was one of the best comic book movies ever. Actually, there's so much more movies that came out around this time that I like more than this one. X2, for example. I think X2 is even a better movie than this. A bunch of the X-Men movies are better than this one. The Winter Soldier is a better movie, I feel like. A bunch of some of the new modern comic book movies coming out nowadays, they're a lot better than this movie, honestly, I feel like. Even movies that came out during the same time period as it. And just, to me, I feel like this movie, there are a lot of problems and a lot of faults with this movie, and even to this day, after rewatching it recently a couple days ago, I still have the same problems that I had before, maybe even more. If you're new to this channel, you know with my reviews, I go with the good and into the bad. So let's start out, of course, because like I said before, there's going to be some bad in here, but there are mixture of good, because I do like this movie. I have problems with it, and I'm probably going to be talking more about my problems in this review, but just so you know, I do like this movie. So let's start with the good on here. First, right off the bat, I gotta say, the story is really great, honestly. I think it's a great story when it coming out to it, about a man who is losing his powers, who is losing his confidence, who is losing everything coming around him. His whole life is basically falling apart. He can't keep up with the job. He can't keep up with school. His friends are moving on from him and everything like that. His aunt is, you know, getting much older, and she's starting to become a little bit weird because of his uncle dead, and he's still living with the regret of Uncle Ben dying in the first one. You know, it's a great story that's coming out of this one, and I just really like it. I like all the motivations for the people. I think it's a really emotional, moving story that is, at the time too, very different from usual comic book movies, and they did a really good job with the story, I feel like, in this one. So too, I gotta say, I love Alfred Molina's Doc Ock. Like, I think he is a fantastic Dr. Octopus. I like the motivations that they gave him here, how he's not really an evil guy, that he is a scientist, and he believes in science, and he had the love of his life, and everything like that, and they're working on his project, and he had this inhibitor chip, and I like, too, how they explained with the octopus, with the tentacles coming out of him, how they explained with the inhibitor chip, it got damaged, and then that's what kind of made it mess with his head a little bit like that, and made the stuff start talking to him and everything, mess with his head. And on top of that, he lost his wife, and he lost everything, and so, like, the motivations that they already have going with him, I like a lot. I like the scene where they're in this kind of like a horror scene, with Sam Raimi always has to put a little bit of horror in his movies. I like when they have that horror scene where the doctors are operating on Doc Ock, and then he basically, the tentacles just kill him while he's sleeping, and he kills all the doctors and everything. I think that's a really good horror scene. Alfred and Lena too. He's just a great actor in general, and I'm so excited to see him coming back as Doc Ock again in No Way Home, which we know is not a spoiler. It was in the trailer, so we know that for sure. But I like seeing him coming back. I really like him as Doc Ock. To me, he always been Doc Ock, even though he's really been the only Doc Ock we had in live action. But he just, even though I still, when I read Doc Ock comics, he's who I imagine as Doc Ock. I do have some problems with him as Doc Ock. Like, he doesn't have the kind of accent I would imagine Doc Ock to have. He doesn't have like a rich British accent, which I always kind of imagine Doc Ock. But that's just a little bit nitpicking. That's not a big thing. He performs the role great. He does present and resemble Doc Octopus, Dr. Octavius from the comic books, and I really can't wait to see him come back again. Like I said, I think he's a great addition to this and a great villain, a villain that you actually feel for and actually feel sorry for, and you kind of understand when he starts doing his bad things. You kind of understand that he's doing this because he truly feels it's the right thing, and he feels like he was wronged by the people and by the government and by everything. He feels like he was wronged by everybody, and this is the right thing that he has to do, and I like that. Also in 2-2, going back to the story part, I really like how this is a Peter Parker story. It is a full-on Peter Parker story. He's not Spider-Man much throughout this movie. He is a lot. He is in a costume a lot. But it is mostly a Peter Parker story, and it's about Peter Parker going through his struggles and about going through his life and growing up, and I really like that. I always like a Spider-Man story that's really about Peter Parker, because at the end of the day, that's honestly one of the big kind of center parts of Spider-Man is the Peter Parker aspect. It's him going to school and going to college, dealing with life and his life issues, and you have that a lot in here. You have a lot of Peter dealing with his life issues, even though he's not in high school anymore and he's not in college. Well, he is in college, but they don't really focus on college as much as I wish they would, but they do focus on his work problems and kind of all problems all around. We kind of get the sense of, yeah, he's going through a lot of stuff, relationship problems he's even going through. Make Peter Parker a very relatable, much more relatable character, I feel like, in this, and which I really like. I like that they have that rivalry building up too in this. Like from this first one, it gets set up, it gets hinted at in the very first one. In this, they end up building up even more of the rivalry and the conflict that is building up with Harry and Peter. We're getting it even more. There's scenes where Harry's slapping Peter in front of people where he's drunk and it's hitting Peter, and there's other scenes where he's like really calm and cool with them, but then he gets really ticked off once he remembers himself that Peter takes pictures of Spider-Man, that Peter is friends with Spider-Man, and Harry thinks that Spider-Man killed his father, which that is something that I'm going to get onto with my problems a little bit. It's something that's building up in there, and Harry thinks that Peter's betraying him, and while Peter really didn't kill his dad, even though he is Spider-Man though, but he didn't really kill his dad, and I just love that rivalry that's building up, and I love how at the ending, when we get that ending reveal where he takes off his mask and he goes, Pete, and he starts like freaking out, and he backs off, and he's almost like in shock, and he just doesn't know what to do. He just doesn't. I love James Franco. I know we can't talk about James Franco anymore, but let's move aside actor and the performance. Let's move aside those. But the performance that the actor gave in this one, it was really good. I thought it was a really good, really believable. You really feel that whole like, whoa, like my best friend? This is my best friend? What? And I just love that build up, and then an ending where we see that reveal of Harry, where we see that he's found the goblin lair. I really liked all that setup, and I liked the build-up that it takes to here and in that. I just think it's so good, and you really feel it. Honestly, probably one of my favorite aspects of this whole series is the build-up with Harry and Peter. I love the relationship. I love the build-up with their feud and their rivalry that's building up. I really liked it a lot, honestly. And you can't go out the review without talking about Mr. Dinklage. I mean, he's just like one of the greatest. He's just like J. Jonah Jameson, you know. He's just like great to have on screen, great to see. Every time you see him, he's great. He's like, Ren's like a rat and eyes like a rodent or something like that. Something like that, he said. He's just hilarious. Every time he's around, he's just hilarious. And then when Peter's trying to go to the bathroom, and then he like pushes Peter aside and walks in the bathroom, opens the door again, Ren? And Peter just takes the door, closes back in. I don't know. It's little scenes like that I really love. He's great to be around. I love Mr. Dinklage. Even J. Jonah Jameson. I really like J. Jonah Jameson in this one too. Again, he's one of the consistents out through this whole series, I feel like that is just so great. He is just, every time he's on here, every time J.K. Simmons as J. Jonah Jameson is on here, you just want him to be on screen more. Like, I could see a whole movie based on J. Jonah Jameson just being an asshole to people that come in his shop and everything. I love that. Like, he's great. He is J. Jonah Jameson from the comic books. No one can ever replay J.K. Simmons. I mean, what more do I can say about it? Like, no one can replay J.K. Simmons. Even the MCU and Disney knows that no one can replay J.K. Simmons. That's why they brought him back in here, because they know that, yeah, he's, throughout the multiverse, he is the only J. Jonah Jameson. One last thing that I really did love in this, I really loved the scene with Peter and Uncle Ben, where they have that flashback, or it's a flashback, or like kind of like he's dreaming of it kind of type of thing. I'd really like that scene. I think that's a good scene. And you have the Spider-Man No More, which is in the comic books, you know, Spider-Man No More and all that. The famous comic book where he throws away the Spider-Man costume and walks away and gives up being Spider-Man for a little bit. I like that, even though my comic book nerdiness doesn't like how the comic books, the way the comic books set up, No More, Spider-Man No More, is very, very different than what the movie does. That scene in general, just that one scene, I just thought that was a really emotional scene, how he's talking with Uncle Ben, and Uncle Ben's trying to take his hand, and he doesn't take his hand, and he says, "I'm sorry, Uncle Ben, I'm Spider-Man No More," and he can't do it, and he walks off and everything like that. And then we cut to those really good, funny scenes with J. Jonah Jameson inside the Spider-Man costume, spinning around and all that stuff. Again, J. Jonah Jameson is awesome. Now, that's pretty much all for my good of this movie. Now, let's get on to the bad of this movie. Now, one thing about this whole movie, too, that I don't really like, that I noticed this time around, that I feel like this movie doesn't really know its tone. I feel like it goes off on a whole bunch of different tones, you know. You have a little bit of horror in here, then you have some comedy in here, and then you have a little bit of an action in here, and then you have a little bit of this. And in some movies, it does work like that. In some movies where you have a whole bunch of those tones mixed into one, it works because you have an overall tone and kind of feeling of the movie. This one you really don't, because it's kind of a whole bunch of different looks, whole bunch of different stuff kind of happening at once. Almost like too much is happening at once, I feel like. And at the end of the day, when you kind of leave this movie, you're kind of like, what was really the overall tone of this movie? What was kind of the feeling they were trying to make me feel this movie? Because at the ending of it, I really didn't feel anything. And because I was confused on what tone they were trying to get me having here, because there was a little bit too much going on in this. And another thing, too, it's just, again, that I just am not a fan of the Mary Jane and Peter relationship in here. Like, to me, it's just kind of repetitive, too, in here. Like, it is very repetitive. Now, in the first one, you know, she knows Peter and MJ, they like each other, but she's dating his best friend and all that stuff. And at first she's dating Harry. Now in this one, she broke up with Harry, and now she's about to be engaged to an astronaut, J. Jonah Jameson's son, the astronaut. My son, the astronaut. Now she's, again, going back and forth. She just hates on Peter. She keeps on telling him how you're not paying attention to me. All this stuff. It's always constant arguing between them. Constant her complaining. Constant Peter trying for some reason to please her and read poetry to her and all this stuff. And then she's again just playing him. And then one scene she tells him she doesn't want to be with him. And then literally cut 5 minutes later, she's sitting at a restaurant with him while she's engaged to somebody else and is asking him to kiss her. And it's just kind of like, pick your side. And then at the very ending, she's about to marry the dude. She's about to go and marry him, and then leaves the marriage. And I think this is one of the most cringiest scenes ever. It's very cringy in my opinion. Now she's running up to him, you know, in her wedding dress, running around the town, goes to his apartment, stays in his apartment, and they finally get together, and then he goes flying off. But then as he goes flying off, she has a look on her face of uncertainty, like, is this really what I want? You know, it's like still you have that going on. It's like it's kind of a repetitive, constant this thing that's going on in the relationship, which I just in my head, this is not the Mary Jane and Peter relationship. This is not Mary Jane. This is not any of them. Like, this is just annoyance and cringy almost. Like, it's really cringy, and it sucks that it's a big part of the movie too. It's a very big part of the movie, and goes in again, which I am so confused at the tone of this movie, because you have a lot of stuff going on. You have this relationship stuff going on. You have with Peter dealing with his power issues and all that stuff, and you have Peter dealing with Harry and all this stuff. You have all this different tones going on, and it kind of gets back into my big problems with this movie, where I just can't stand the relationship aspect, or even Mary Jane for that instance. I just don't like her or the relationship in this movie. And again, this movie makes me even less of a fan. It's funny that now rewatching these movies again, it makes me even more of a less of a fan of Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man and Peter Parker both. Like, I'm becoming more of not even a fan. Like in this one, I'm not that much of a fan. Even though I like the fact that there's a Peter Parker story in this, I don't like his portrayal as Peter Parker in this. He's too much of a jerk. He makes Peter Parker seem like a jerk. Yeah, he is getting stuff, he's getting beat up. He's losing his job. His best friend's not liking him anymore. He's losing a girl he likes. But in the comic books, Peter Parker always endures, and he is still Peter Parker throughout all that stuff. That's just part of him. That's part of his life. That's part of what he goes through. He goes through all that stuff. He doesn't have the perfect life at all, but he is still Peter Parker. But he starts hurting into almost like a jerk, and like he almost starts feeling like a person that, and it sucks to say this, that kind of deserves all the stuff that he's getting. He kind of deserves all that, and you're not supposed to feel that about Peter Parker, but you're almost feeling like that. Like, it's just, I don't like his version of Peter Parker in this at all. I definitely don't like his Spider-Man at all. To me, he just does not look like Spider-Man, does not resemble Spider-Man. He does have one line with Spider-Man where he throws a change at Doc Ock and goes like, "Here's your change," and he throws it at him. That one line I'll give. Again, the organic webs is not my thing. I don't like in this story, too, how we have that issue of him losing his web fluids and losing it because of his feelings or because he's not feeling confident or good and he's losing his organic webs. Like, to me, again, going back to the whole thing, the organic webs issue, it takes away, I feel like, a lot of Spider-Man as a character. Like, I know a lot of people complain about Iron Man Jr., but to me, the organic webs takes away the whole science aspect of Peter Parker, and he takes away the whole aspect where he shouldn't be just losing his web fluid now because he feels unconfident in himself. This should be a constant issue that goes on through him just throughout his daily life as Spider-Man, where he loses his web fluid because it's unorganic, it's man-made, and he loses his web fluid from that. It should be like that, not losing it because he loses confidence in himself. I don't know, I just don't like that aspect at all to it. At the end of the day, my overall thoughts of Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 2 is Spider-Man 2 is a good sequel to the first Sam Raimi Spider-Man. It do have a lot of good in it that I do enjoy about it, still to this day. A lot of that stuff, it sucks, is I do like a lot in this movie, but a lot of the stuff I don't like outweighs a lot of the stuff I do like, so it weighs it on a little bit to where I can't like this movie as much as most people like it. I don't think this movie is as good as a lot of people come out and say that it is. Because at the end of the day, I feel like it's a good movie, it's a good sequel. It's not really a good Spider-Man movie, just like the first one. There are good in this movie. This movie is good. It's better than most comic book movies. It's just, in my opinion, it's not a top 10 comic book movie. It isn't. It is, to me, it does not that good. Let me know down in the comment section below, and let me know your thoughts on Spider-Man 2, on Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 2. I always like to know your guys' thoughts. Do you agree with me that this isn't really the best comic book movie ever? Do you think this movie does have problems with it? Or do you disagree with me and you're one of the people that thinks this is one of the greatest comic book movies ever? And that is the most people. Most people think this is the greatest, or one of the greatest comic book movies ever made. And I can totally see why, because it does have a lot of good in it. It does have a lot of good stuff going on in it, but still, at the end of the day, to me, it has a lot of problems that kind of hinders it being a really great comic book movie. That's pretty much all my thoughts on the movie, guys. Let me know down in the comment section below, and let me know your thoughts on it. As always, if you like this video, make sure you give this video a like and subscribe to my channel. I really like it. I really appreciate it. It helps this channel grow, and I always appreciate it all the time when you help this channel grow. And as always, remember, with great power comes great responsibility. Remember that.